So I just want to do a quick technical check. Can anybody hear me? I want to know if you and me can hear each other through my microphone. Let's get that out of the way. Get anyone in attendance. Okay, great. So at least one person can hear me. So I just want to introduce myself. My name is Paul Bruce. I'm on the API team here. At this point, I focus on marketing and other related logistics to get word out. We have been sort of out of the game when it comes to the open source for a little while, and we want to get back into that. We are definitely committed to providing our open source users the tools that they need to do their job and to be happy and then get back home in time. So one of the things that we've done is we have taken a little break to work on some other stuff, and then we're planning on releasing the next version of SoapUI, that would be 5.1.2, into the open source space up on SourceForge come next week. So our intended delivery date is the 11th. At that point, barring all goes well, and what I'd like to do is go over a couple of the things that are going to be in that release. So this is my first Google Plus Hangout, and what I'm going to do right now is try to share my screen out. So first things first, I'll go full screen with this, and then minimize, of course, the Google Plus window. So the first thing I'd like to show you is the release notes. Now this is basically all the stuff that's gone into the open source update as of the last open source update we did, which is version 5.0.0. So this bundles a bunch of different updates that we did to the commercial product, and the release notes themselves cover a lot of these topics. So right off the bat, we start with the latest release. That was the bugs fixed in version 5.1.2. And then going back even further, we do have bugs fixed under 5.1.1. So I don't want to bore anybody with the fact that these are just bug fixes that I'm showing you right now. But this does represent the fact that we did do a lot of work, both in the commercial and the open source product up to this point, to make sure that it is as high quality as possible. And that's what we're all looking for, is high quality tools for high quality APIs. So as that's the case, we're really proud of everything we do when we do it right. And one of the things we did was fix a lot of bugs. So we've also got a couple of different things noted here. A little bit further back, there are user contributions to this list. So, anytime we have somebody who uses our products, anytime somebody from the open source community gives us insight into how we can do things better, we are all ears. A number of other people are on this Google Hangout, and that is Matti, the product owner. We've got Niklas from Sweden. They're both in Sweden. And then we have a couple of other people from the team here. And we are all ears when it comes to what you think we should be doing and where we should be going with the products that we have, open source or not. So I'm just going to do a quick technical check here for a second, just make sure everything's still working properly. Once again, this is my first Google Hangout. So we'll just check real quick. Okay. So as you can see, there's a lot of stuff that's in this release. We also updated the libraries, so to include a couple of different libraries that help us support JSON. So the world is got a lot of SOAP related services in there, but there's a lot of transition over to the REST world, and as such, a lot of the REST traffic that you do is, of course, the JSON format. So we provided additional options here, and my product owner is telling me that there's a more readable bug fix list already out. So by the time we have this ready to ship, you'll definitely have that latest version of the release. Thanks, Mati. So aside from the fact that we've put in some bugs for things like memory issues and then mocking and quite a few other items, we also now support JSON path. And I actually want to switch over and kind of give a brief tutorial on that. Just to let you know, the release notes are always available from your SoapUI 512 open source install directory. So wherever that is, you'll be able to get that in your release notes. So let's switch over to the 512. This is a preview as of, I think, last week. And come the time that we release it to SourceForge, we'll have pretty much everything thoroughly baked. So what you see on the left is a project that I've already got built a little. I built this out a little bit. This is based on the geocoding stuff from Google. Now I've got a test case with a bunch of test steps over here that I used to pull in, REST-related calls. I used to pull that in and then interact with them using XPath in order to navigate to find a specific product value, a property value, and then use them later on. So one of the difficulties here is that if I've put my REST cap on and I'm working with JSON content going across the wire, problem is I don't think in XPath. So in the original versions we sort of made it. I don't know if anybody knows the word thunk anymore, but we sort of made a way to thunk the JSON coming in and turn it into XML internally, and then be able to use the standard XPath expressions against sort of these object notation graphs. That doesn't really fit for everybody. So one of the things we did, certainly in the commercial product, but then also now as will be released out into 512, is the ability to do this from a pure JSON style notation. So let's look at what it used to be, what it used to look like for a test request to come back. Now, I've purposely made this XML. I'm calling out to the Google API and asking for some information about Boston, which is where our corporate office is. And I'm getting back XML format. So maybe a service that's got both formats presented, something that is interoperable between old school legacy systems and new stuff, maybe mobile clients. Maybe you can switch that. And one of the ways that I'm doing that here is I'm purposely sending it the fact that I want XML coming back as that format. So of course the old way to deal with this was to, in let's say the case of a property transfer, to specify a whole bunch of XPath. Now, the other thing you need to do is pull in a namespace in order to identify each of those elements uniquely. So as you can see, this is not what I deal with if I'm dealing with a RESTful service and maybe a mobile app. It's relatively complicated. I mean, it's great for SOAP people, but for REST people, this is not native. This is not what most people are expecting. So the exact same example, just done as JSON, is now that same request with a specific parameter to ask for JSON back. And right off the bat, you can see one of the slight improvements that we actually heard from a number of people was if the format coming back is JSON, don't show it in the XML. So In fact, we've got a JSON tab now here that shows it properly. If it's JSON, it shows it in the JSON tab, and then tells you, by the way, if you're on the XML view, this is not XML. So it's a helpful clarification. So as you can see, that JSON is object notation here. We've got a result set, and then there's a couple of address components to the first element, and there's that short and long name, which happens to be the same in this case. And the property transfer, now instead of being that declare namespace and then a whole big unnecessary, in this case, unnecessary XPath expression, is now a relatively short JSON path. In fact, let me zoom in here, see if I can zoom in here. As you can see, there's a big difference there. Now it's much shorter. So we're basically, hitting the root document, getting the results, that first result indexed as 0, and then the address component index of 0, and then the .short name element. So much more compact, much more like what you would write in a browser if you were using something like jQuery. You'd be using that $ as well. But this is basically its JSON path. It's a very easy way to describe, to navigate your way to just the element that you're looking for, and then the rest of it's all the same. A shorter descriptive language, descriptive example here, and then you just tell it where to shove the property in this case. So this comes really helpful when it comes to either converting services over from SOAP to REST, or if you're building all REST services, you don't want to have to think in XML terms. That's why we put that in there. So there's that. The only other thing I would mention, though, is that there are a couple of items here you might want to make sure if you're trying to use this, that you remember that back in the property transfer for XPath, this required the property response as XML. So if you're getting JSON back through the wire, let's actually look at that again. Flip to that view. This is what's coming across the wire. It's not even close to XML. So just make sure that, the same, that the property that you're using to do the property transfer, the source property, is switched over to response rather than response as XML. It's just if you're converting some steps up, sometimes it's, it spits you back a message saying, this can't be parsed or something. So just keep in mind, you got to switch over to the response object, and then you can use that path, JSON path language to select that out. Now let me think, is there anything else in these screens that I should talk about? No, I think we're good. So biggest news here, there's a lot of bug fixes. I really encourage you to look through them. If you were having some kind of issue before and you found a workaround, fantastic. But it never hurts to just go through the list of things that were fixed and rolled through, and make sure that you don't have to do what you were doing before if something was fixed. So there's those, and then also the JSON support. So I'm going to check some of the chat or any of the comments just to make sure I'm answering those for you. I think we're good. Now keep in mind, folks, if you would like to enter a comment, there is a chat bar. On my computer, at least, it's on the left side of the Google Hangout window. So if you go over to that chat section, feel free to type in any of your questions over there. I'm actually going to send out an audience question here, so give me a few moments. If you do have any questions, you can also use that Q&A button on the left as well. That'll pop you into a different Google Plus app. Somebody's saying they're having issues here. Hold on. Okay, so just in case there's any late viewers, I'm going to cycle through what I've just shown you. I'm going to cycle through that in a few more minutes. So if you got any questions or comments, we can work with you on that. But I'll show this stuff again in a few minutes. There we go. I see somebody entered a test question. Thank you, my dear team. I should also mention I'm just the one that has the time to run this Google Hangout. There is a whole team of people, of course, on the SoapUI code base, and then also in some of our other commercial products that basically do pretty much all the work. And then we just get to show it out to the world. So that's the role I'm serving now, and it's not only an honor, but it's kind of unfair that we don't get to highlight them as often as we should. So it's always good to see that. It's always good to have the product owner on just to make sure that I'm saying the right things. So I see a few more viewers have joined up. Thank you so much for coming on. Now, I'd like to do a quick technical check just to make sure that you all can find the comments and the chat. There are two options, or at least should be, on your screen in Google Hangouts. On the left, there's the comment section. That's a little blue chat bubble. And then there should be another chat bubble that says Q&A in it. So if you want to ask a question and get an answer, then I can definitely, we've got a number of people on the SmartBear side joined up, and the comments, feel free to be part of that conversation there as well. So what I'd like to do is go over some of the content that we've got to present today. The topic is SoapUI Open Source, and that we have a new version coming out in the next week, version 5.1.2. We also are very interested in continuing our commitment to the open source community. We had to take a little hiatus, a little break to get some stuff in order over here to really release another commercial product. And now we find that it is in our DNA to continue this open source commitment. So we are, showing that out right now with a new version that's going to come out next week. And that includes a couple of things that people have specifically asked for. Most notably, there have been a lot of, updates since, what was the last version was, I think was 5.0, 5.0 that we released to the open source SourceForge. And there are a number of things that were fixed as well between that time and now. We also have support for JSON path notation. So if you're building REST services, then instead of having to deal with XML to transfer properties, now you can speak the same native language that you normally would, or at least very close to that same syntax as you would be interacting with JSON style format or representations in a browser setting or between APIs. So let me switch over and show you a little bit of information here. First thing I want to do is share my screen out. So I'll do that right now. This is just a quick note about where to get the list of bugs that are fixed. That's in the release notes, and that's both in your open source distro as well as in the directory, in the installer directory here. So I just want to go over this. The bugs and the things that were fixed, that covers both the stuff all the way from 5.0 all the way up to 5.1.2. And there were a bunch of things that we did, of course, for the commercial product reasons. And then there's a bunch of stuff that applied to both versions of the code base there. So in this case, we've got a number, the list of bugs that are fixed out here. And then there's some updated libraries, especially when it comes to supporting JSON. We need to pull that in. And then also some of the security stuff. There were one or two things in there. So I would highly recommend going over this and finding the items that are not marked as pro only, especially for the open source folks to look to see if any of this stuff applies to you, if it makes sense, if you were making your own workarounds for a specific issue and now it's fixed. Why do that? Why have to do that? So just go over this document when you get a chance and look for stuff that may apply to you. If you have any questions, of course, there's always the community. We do have a website called community.smartbear.com, but you can always ask your questions over Twitter, the SoapUI handle, the @SoapUI, and we'll get you an answer there. So the release notes, that's one thing. A lot of bugs we fixed. Let's hop into the product, and I want to show you what we've done to support JSON-P. Or I should say JSON path. So we've got a couple of test steps here. I've got a test case that's already built, and I've got a couple of duplicate steps here just to make it easy to illustrate the difference between how we would typically take in a document, whether that was an XML document or whether that was a JSON content, and then map certain properties to other properties. So in this case, let's pull up the old XML version of what I used to ask Google APIs for. I would ask it for a specific city, the specific city details, and I would paste in something like Boston. And back a couple years ago, maybe I would call it and ask for XML because that's what everybody required of me at the time. So of course, then if I wanted to transfer a certain property, like let's say the short name from this document to something else, maybe another step or another request, maybe I use the property transfer. And the property transfer would require me to do a couple things. Of course, it would require me to, and let me zoom in here for you. It would require me to specify a nice, long, complete, and thorough descriptive XPath expression. So that's fun. And because I wanted to reference elements that were specific to that document and that schema, I would have to pull in a namespace as well. So that's also a whole load of fun. Now, in the past, even if JSON was coming across a wire, you'd still be using XPath to pull information out, because all it is really a navigation or a selector syntax. When you are building REST services and you're using JSON across a wire, at what point do you ever want to be writing XPath? My answer to that would be never. So what we did, we heard a number of people say the same thing, and we introduced a different type of path language called JSON path. So let's look at the example as it is coming back with JSON. This is the same request, just with the format parameter of JSON. And instead of seeing this as XML, right off the bat, that doesn't make sense because it's not. You now see that it says, wait a second, you can't view it in the XML viewer because it's JSON. So that's a good little indication that came back from a number of people saying, why should we be able to see this in XML? So very good clarification. You switch over to the JSON view, and you see the native JSON format. This is the document that has a list of results. Let me zoom in here again. List of results. And each result has a number of components in it, things like the long and short name. So pretty straightforward. It's a JSON document. Whoop-de-doo. But now, when you're building property transfers, instead of having that long verbose XPath that was kind of sort of just a way to deal with the way that SoapUI was internally processing things, well, now we've got the native format here to your JSON object. So dealing with it as if it was an object, an instantiated object that have the dot notation and stuff. You can definitely now reference items in that JSON document in a much more native fashion. In this case, we've got that result set right off the root here. In fact, let me zoom in again. So that's a little more readable. The result set, and we're looking for the first item in it. That's the 0, the bracket 0, and then dot address components, and then the first address component would be that bracket 0, and then the dot short name property. So if we just switch back over to look at that, now we're seeing that results, and the first result here, that's that first object. The address components array now has that list of components, and one of them is the short name, and that's represented in a much more compact, much more intuitive, much more native style to people who are dealing with JSON objects. So we think that's really going to help people sort of stay in the mentality of the fact that, you're building these services, you're building these tests. You don't want to have to do more translation in your brain. The less sort of like busy work that you're doing, the better off you are and the quicker you can get to testing, get to the results. So that's the JSON support. I would make a quick note just to say that if you are sort of starting to think of converting your statements upwards, if let's say you were using that XML path a lot over your JSON documents, that one of the things you might get hung up on if you just switch this over to JSON path, let me just copy this out for a second just in case. If you switch over to JSON path, of course, this isn't going to work, so you rewrite it to the JSON path. But you might get an error if you just play it because the property should be changed here. Instead of response as XML, it's really not XML anymore. We don't have to change, we don't have to pre-parse that JSON down to XML just to write XML statements on it now. So what you want to do is actually switch over to the response property. So changing that up, and that's what you see represented in here. Instead of it being response XML, you want to change it to response here. So that's the big news. The other big news is that we really do look forward to everything that our open source community members have to say about the product. It comes out of our character, both as developers, as product team members, just to be able to hear what real people in the field are using the product for, and how they see it being bettered, how they see it being improved. So I'll switch back over, look at the chat, just make sure if anybody has any questions. So I'm just going to go through this one more time in about 3 or 4 minutes, just for anybody who joins up really late. Some of the content that we've already covered, and then we'll end this session. Some of the people on this call have had big problems using the chat. It's not always clear where the chat buttons are. I had to move my mouse over the left side of my screen. It looks like some of the Mac users with Safari, the QA buttons and the chat buttons are under the top right corner. So different for everybody. Just look around, mouse around the page, just make sure that, if there's anybody, if there's any differences between platforms, you just look for them depending on your own platform. There's a couple of things you might also want to keep in touch with us under. There's, of course, the @SoapUI handle on Twitter. We also have our forums. That's a really great place to discuss and to ask questions and get answers from the rest of the community. And then by all means, at any point, if you have any questions or any comments, feel free to send them along to whoever you know at SmartBear. That's fine. We can get them routed that way. But we do have a number of much more ready to go and streamlined places where you can put your feedback to good use so that we can get them to the right place faster. I'm also hearing that Matti, our product owner, that he says that we plan on doing another open source release in the next quarter. So that would be, let's see, it's March now. That would be April, May, June. So we intend on doing another open source release, maybe including, well, it depends on what you tell us. It depends on what comes out of the products, that you know, our commercial products, what insights we have there, and then also what you tell us is most important. So he says, well, hopefully some more JSON improvements, and I would love that, because I think that a lot of my conversations, as much as they're split, I wouldn't say they're even anymore, evenly split between people who are doing SOAP and REST. I think that people are starting to do a lot more REST these days, mostly because, I mean, from what I understand, it's because of the multiple types of devices that we've got, and it's not necessarily effective for those devices to be able to parse XML. So you know, being able to handle much more simplified JSON stuff that already has JavaScript inferred, like browsers, that's sort of formalizing the fact that we have to move to like a more RESTful format, or at least augment the services we have with more than just one type of format. So the more we can support there, the better it is. I just want to reiterate once again, I'll be covering the content in about a minute. Give one or two more people the opportunity to show up. And again, any questions can go into the chat or the Q&A section, either on the left side, depending on your browser, depending on your platform. Google Plus Hangouts looks different. So over on the left, there's a bar you get a mouse over, or maybe up at the upper right-hand corner if you're on a Mac. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen out, make it easier for us to see what I'm talking about here. I'll just give it a minute. Just give it a minute to make sure that everybody gets that screen refresh. Okay, so I've got my my install directory here in the open source distribution. There is a document called release notes. So right off the bat, there's a couple of things that are noteworthy about SoapUI 5.1.2 open source. We're going to be releasing that to SourceForge come next week. I believe our intended delivery date is the 11th. So just look for that, you know, towards the end of next week. And there's a couple of major things that are going on. We're rolling up a lot of bug fixes and a lot of updates when it comes to, you know, internal functionality up through that track. In fact, if I pull up those release notes, there's a section for each of the individual version numbers, and those bugs that were fixed within that version, between the last version and that one, those are listed each year. If we scroll down, we see the bugs that were released for that previous version as well. And depending on whether they apply to the open source or not, is just a matter of looking for certain things that say pro only. So this is stuff that was fixed in SoapUI 5.1.2 Pro, and then also open source. But when it's a pro only thing that was included, that only applies to pro, that that is also in there just for reference sake. Stuff that doesn't have pro in it, that's the open source bug fix there. Those are the things that would have made it into, will be making it into the 5.1.2 release. So just go over this document and make sure that if there's anything that strikes your interest, if there's anything you remember as being something that you were looking for, that now you know that's in there. There's a couple of other updates. Of course, we included a number of other libraries, one of which is the JSON support. So as you can see, that speaks right to one of the items that I'd like to show you in SoapUI right now. So let me launch up our pre-release version of SoapUI 5.1.2. And what I've got here is a test case, pretty standard thing, test case with a couple of test steps in it. And I've got duplicate test steps here for illustration purposes. So typically it would be something that, you wouldn't have the exact same things, but right now I've got a version that was my XML version. This was a service that, I used as an example, the Google APIs, the mapping stuff. And what I'm doing is asking it for information on Boston. In this case, I've got a static value here, and the format I've specified as XML. So in this case, what comes back is, of course, XML, a document. Now, I would then turn over to maybe something like a property transfer to take a value out of that structured document and use it somewhere else. Maybe put it into a property and then use it elsewhere in my test steps. And to pull that out, we'd use the standard way to do that would actually be, and I switched that last time I showed this, would be XPath. So, we've got this pretty complete and thorough way to express how to navigate through that XML document. And that's really fun to write. For those people who deal with XML a lot, I've had to deal with my fair share of XPath in my day. And when I'm dealing with JSON, it doesn't make any sense to deal with XPath. So, previous to this release, we had XPath support and, slowly working in JSON capabilities for the past year or so. We decided that, internally we'll just convert that JSON, that incoming JSON, to an XML document, and then use the standard XPath to be able to navigate over that. And what people said was, well, why don't you take it one step further and simplify it and just make it easier for people who are building REST services or RESTful systems to just use a notation syntax that makes sense to them. And that would be JSON path. So instead of having to write these kind of XPath expressions and then, by the way, pull in some namespaces, what we've done in an example where what comes back is JSON, like we've got these results here with some, with each of them having certain components like short and long name and so on and so forth. Now in the property transfer, the difference is that instead of having to, for whatever reason, write XPath over your JSON stuff, you write JSON notation over your JSON results. So that seemed to make sense for us. And as you can see, it's much shorter. Let me zoom in here. And we're referencing the root of the document with the $sign. And right off the bat, there's a top level root element called results. And we're looking for the first result. So that's that zero indexed array indexer. And then, that's looking through the address components, gets that first address component, and then the short name property. So it's much cleaner, much more compact, much more native and intuitive to people who are already living in a sea of JSON data. It's just to be able to reference it almost like they would right from, let's say, jQuery in a browser. So there's that. I would like to call out and just, if to note that if there are people who are excited about this and looking to convert their what they used to do in XPath to JSON because their documents are JSON, that it's just a matter of course, rewriting your XPath. You can get rid of those namespaces. That would be great. And then instead of pointing to the response as XML, because this is no longer XML. Even remember I mentioned, even if it was incoming JSON, it would be transformed to an XML document so we could use XPath on it. Well, that's half the reason why the response as XML was there. Well, instead of that, now on your JSON step, you'll want to specify the response object, the response property. So instead of it being response as XML, that's a no-no. Switch it over to the response property option, and then your JSON path expression will be able to match, internally. So just switch that over, and you'll be able to run that. So yeah, going from something that used to be XML to now something that works. Oh, it doesn't work. What did I do with this? Let's take a look. Response, city name. Well, it worked this morning, everybody. Let's see. Not found. Index. Well, I won't debug it for you here, but the point is that now you can actually specify your path down your JSON document in JSON native syntax. So there's that. And the last thing I would mention is I'm just going to check the chat real quick. Good. Okay. So one of the things that Matti, the product owner, says is that we intend on releasing yet another version of SoapUI Open Source version 5.2 come the next quarter. So that would be sometime probably, I want to say maybe May, June. But that is all up to what people want out of it. So your comments, your suggestions, and if we're seeing a number of bugs or a couple of bugs and we want to put those into the open source version, that's kind of up to us. But what's up to you is what you do find to be most valuable in the open source tool you already use in SoapUI, and how that can really bring you to a place where you're being able to be more productive or just get home quicker. So let us know what you think, good, bad, whatever it is. We're really looking for a lot of your feedback to help us drive what goes into the future open source updates. So once again, my name is Paul. I'm just one of the members of the API team here. We had a number of people on the call already. There was a developer in the wings, a product owner, and one of our VPs was actually here for a while, and a couple of community managers. So that's us. That's SmartBear. We're looking for your feedback, and we can't wait to hear from you. Cheers, folks.